social media platform Reddit said it will start charging companies for access to its API. That stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's the method through which other entities can download and process your data. This will have serious implications for AI companies like Google and OpenAI that use Reddit's conversations to train their algorithms. Meanwhile, Reddit is preparing to go public this year. The company makes most of its money through ads, but plans to announce prices for its API access in the coming weeks. So, Scott, this is the latest development in a larger story that's been unfolding, and that is all these generative AI programs like ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion and so on. The reason they're so powerful is because they've been able to collect basically the entire corpus of data on the internet for free, and then they use that data to generate their own content. Now, Reddit is not the first one to do this. Twitter recently started charging for its API as well. But the message that a lot of these tech companies are now sending is essentially, sorry, our content and our data is no longer free. Where do you stand on this issue?
I think it's fascinating. I think generative AI or these large language models have an obligation to figure out some sort of licensing agreement. If they're going to come in and grab the shelves of all of your data and use that to inform the product that ultimately they spit out on the other end based on a query, they technically owe you money. If a radio station plays a bunch of Madonna songs, there is a licensing group that represents most or all artists that they send a check to. If they play a Madonna song 3,000 times, they have a calculation and they send the rights group $3,000 to go to Madonna. The rights group holds on to 10% of it, and they send Madonna or Warner or whoever her label is $2,700. And I think that's what needs to happen here. I was on the board of the New York Times. I don't know if you knew that, Ed. I only mention it about every 48 hours. But I remember saying, and I'm not playing revisionist historian here, when I first went on the board, we need to shut off the crawlers from Google. We need to sit down with the Newhouses at Condé Nast and the Murdochs at News Corp and the folks that own the FT and basically stop all crawling of our data by Google, wrap it all into one big licensing agreement, and then go to Microsoft, who had a viable search engine at the time, Bing, and say, who wants the most precious, valuable, aspirational content for their search engine, and basically get into a bidding war. And the reason that they refused to do it was, A, they all hated each other more than they hated Google because they were stupid. They didn't realize their real enemy was Google, not News Corp or the FT or Pearson or whoever. And also they were worried about antitrust. But the same thing needs to happen here. The content providers need to, whether it's Getty Images or, Musk is saying that they've been crawling his Twitter API. I don't know how true that is. Yeah. But if I can go to ChatGPT and I can say, write a blog post about failing young men in the voice of Scott Galloway, and it comes back with a 1,500-word blog post on struggling men with a bunch of dad jokes, and it attempts to be in my voice, it's clear that the large language model has digested, absorbed a bunch of our content. Yeah. And if someone is able to monetize that content, specifically the end user and or ChatGPT, and they have crawled my content as a means of informing what they expect rate on the other end, shouldn't we be compensated? Yeah. So I think this is going to end up ideally somewhere around where the music industry ended up. And there's also a strategy around here. Adobe has their own generative AI model around imagery. And one of the things they're advertising as a feature is that they own the IP or it's fair use design, meaning that no one will ever get sued here because they own the data or they have rights-free use of it. So I think this is a big issue. Where it ends up is I do think they end up striking deals with the original creators. The impact it will have, though, is similar to streaming. It will be sort of a winner take most, and that is the artists that have the most work that's kind of, I don't know, the most iconic that these generative AI models want to absorb and inform their work will make a lot of money, and there'll be a small amount of money for the long tail. But I think it's coming, and I think it makes sense, and I think they're smart. I think they need to bind together to present one unified front to the AI community. Yeah. The other big story in this AI IP issue was the AI Drake song that came out a few days ago. And basically someone used an AI generator to create
a song that sounded like Drake featuring The Weeknd, sounded like The Weeknd. It got more than 600,000 streams on Spotify in just a couple days until Universal Music Group got it taken down. And now Universal Music Group is telling all these streaming platforms that you have to block the AI systems from scraping their music. It feels like this could happen in the film industry too. And the rules seem pretty clear in terms of musical artists, because they already have that IP. There's laws around that. That's clearly how they're making their living. But here's a more nuanced example. What about content that users create? So say I create a blog post, or I just message my friends, or I have a conversation on Reddit. And Reddit technically owns the content there because it's part of their API. But ultimately, I was the creator, even though I wasn't necessarily trying to profit from it. And ultimately, these AI models will profit off of the content that I created. So how do you think about it from the perspective of just your average user who's messaging and creating content online? And do you think the rules still apply there?
I get it in theory, but I don't think they're going to be entitled to or get payment, and nor do I think that'll stop them from continuing to post. When you post content
Right.
on Reddit, implicit in that is an exchange of value. You're posting content on Reddit to enter into a dialogue, maybe to get some street cred, to ask a question, to build awareness of your ability to analyze, the fundamentals of a certain stock, to express your viewpoint, to influence others. So Reddit has figured out technology and made expenditures to create that community and those network effects. And I think they are entitled, in fact, to compensation. I think an individual, now if an artist is putting out content and they're working hard and they're spending a lot of money, and then that content, as referenced in your example around Drake, is used to create another song that is driven, informed, inspired by a Drake song, I think he and his record label are entitled to compensation. But when we post blogs, when we post content on different platforms, I think that the value exchange has already happened. And if Reddit can garner additional income, then that will give them the economic motivation and incentive to make the experience better and more rewarding for you. But the idea of trying to compensate, and a lot of people have talked about this, to use the blockchain such that every individual or user of a social media platform gets a portion of the advertising revenues that they create, I've always thought that's bullshit and a logistical and tracking nightmare. That implicit in your posting content is that there's an exchange there of value that is worth it to you. Drake puts out music because he wants to make money, and he spends a lot of money trying to produce it and distribute it. He doesn't go to MySpace and put up music just hoping to get distribution. There will probably be forums for new artists who will say, go ahead and use my content, but just credit me or reference me.
Yeah, so it sounds like the difference that the delineation here is, are you trying to make money or are you not trying to make money? And it seems strange that for so long, all of these companies have had basically free access to their APIs. Their job is to make money. They should be trying to charge as much as they can for access to that. I also wanted to talk about this idea of fair use. So fair use is the term that applies to copyrighted material that's allowed to be replicated, but it's only for things like news reporting, teaching, research. In those instances, you don't need to pay. I assume your position is that fair use cannot be reasonably applied to these AI models.
I don't think so. I mean, unless you want to flip it to, it'll be up to the creator. If a creator says, so I don't mind that my content is used to inform these generative AI models. I don't mind. I think it's kind of funny. I want reach. I want influence. That's the exchange for me.
Yeah.
But if you're an artist, if you're REM, and this is how you make a living, you might be able to say, no, this is, this is part of the large, whatever you want to call it, 80s rights licensing model. And if our AI LLM determines that you have used our content to inspire your output, then we have a legal case against you. And I
Yep,
think there's going to be some there's going to be some iconic or landmark or very visible cases here. But I
totally.
think a lot of people, just as they put stuff, when you put stuff up on Discord, I'm sorry, when you put stuff up on Quora, or you put stuff up on shit, what's the one that the
Reddit.
Twitter guy started? Oh,
Oh,
when you post stuff to Medium,
mm,
you can either make it subscription or you can just post it. And I think this is sort of similar. If you just post content, you're looking to build awareness, you're looking to influence people. So if a model comes in and scrapes that, they might owe Medium some money, but they don't owe you some money. You have
yeah.
posted it not with the intention of getting money there. You've posted it for other reasons, for an exchange of value. Now, you might be able to ask for some sort of credit or reference that it says in the references, similar to the way we have footnotes in the book, that says these are the following sources that inspired
Mm,
above a certain amount that inspired some of the content here.
yeah. It sort of reminds me of the economic differences between America and China,
Hmm.
because in China, they have extremely weak intellectual property laws. They have barely any copyright laws. And it basically creates this economy of counterfeit products from, like designer handbags and smartphones and enterprise software. And there's actually a name for this, which is Shanzhai. And it's basically describes this copycat culture economy in China. And it's all by design, right? Because what it's allowed them to do is unleash this power of scale. They can create all these phones, all these algorithms. And it's been a positive for them. But it feels like in America's case, if we don't start cracking down on this stuff and cracking down on these AI models and the content they use, we're basically signing up to becoming a Shanghai nation where your IP is not necessarily protected. Everyone can copy each other. And it's kind of a game of who can produce it the fastest and at the greatest scale. So I guess the question that we should be asking ourselves and that I'd ask you is, do we want to become that? Do we want to become a culture of produce, 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 at the expense of originators getting the credit and probably the compensation that they would want? My view is, by the way, no, I don't want that. Selfishly, I would want to get credit for things. But how do you see it?
Well, it's a difference between whether your economy is an artisanal economy or an IP theft economy. And if your economy is growing faster than, say, 8% a year, it means you're in the business of IP theft. And by the way,
Yeah.
America was in that business for the 18th and 19th centuries. We used to go steal manufacturing and textile technology out of Europe. We would actually kidnap artisans and we would basically rip off technology and manufacturing technology and build factories up and down the eastern seaboard. And we basically stole their IP and we printed money. Now China's doing the same thing to us.
Yep.
Eventually an economy evolves into more of an artisanal economy, and that is they have their own original ideas. So you talk your own book. If
Yep.
you're France and you have luxury brands, you are really into hardcore IP protection.
Yeah.
If you're India or you're Vietnam or you're China, where you can take something and replicate it and produce it at a lower cost, you are very much into the IP theft business.
Mm-hmm.
And both play a role in the economy. But ultimately, companies usually start out as a low-cost producer stealing IP, and they're in the business of low-cost labor and producing something at scale for a lower cost. And then they move into, over time, usually their own original IP, and then they try and protect it. But we have always been, or not always, but for the last, I'd call it 50, 100 years, been in the business of being artisans and innovation. And we have very, very extensive detailed treaties. We have very extensive detailed treaties with China that says, okay, we know people copy Microsoft Office, but it can't be state supported. It can't be institutional. You have to crack down on it.
Mm-hmm.
And in exchange, we'll continue to buy your goods. But a lot of trade agreements between nations are just about this, the level, how in how disciplined and how many resources, how disciplined and fashion and how many resources are they going to devote to ensuring that the entire nation just doesn't knock off Birkin bags and software and not send any flows, any money back to the United States. I mean, this is a huge issue in the pharmaceutical industry. It's not that hard to reverse engineer a diabetes drug. And these basically pharmaceutical companies will price these drugs at a much lower cost to try and reduce the incentive to reverse engineer and just copy them.
Hmm.
And so what we end up with is a nation that has the highest healthcare costs in the world because we have such strong IP
Right.
protection and such strong regulatory capture by the pharmaceutical industry that basically spends money on these whores called elected representatives that we end up paying the highest cost in the world. Whereas if in India, if GlaxoSmithKline wants to charge above a certain dollar amount for insulin or whatever it is,
Hmm.
the temptation to just rip it off is so great that they keep the prices much lower.
Yep.
So this is a huge cat and mouse dance done by corporations and economies everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like the decision that we have to make is, do we care about IP enough to stifle the growth of the AI economy? Because if you do that, then these AI models will have less access to information, less access to data, and they won't be able to grow as fast. Where on that spectrum do you lie? Would you say?
Well, they'll move fast and break things. They won't give a shit. They'll wait till people sue them and let the courts figure it out.
But
They're not going to stop.
if you controlled the universe here, if you could lead the direction of the U.S., are you pro move fast and break things here, or take our time with it?
Well, I'd be married to Emily Ratajkowski, own the Glasgow Rangers, and raise Great Danes. Oh wait, okay, we're talking about IP. That sounds like a pretty good life. I just made that up. Next life, I'd either be a Broadway dancer or a Navy SEAL, and married to Idris Elba. Is that his name? Idris, yeah. Anyways, Idris called me. Uh, Look, I think it's going to be. I think it's important that creators get compensation that inspires them, such that they can make a living and they get compensated. And then if
Hmm.
AI ends up creating, a fraction of the stakeholder value, it probably will. There's no reason they can't pay. Google should be paying creators more.
Hmm.
Google is worth more. Google's worth a couple $1 trillion because imagine if MSNBC didn't have to pay Stephanie Rule or any of its producers or, the gaffer, the sound guy. I mean, the reason why TikTok's such an amazing business is they don't pay their creators anything. So I think that's got to change. I think that
Yeah.
the idea of paying your creators based on the value, the economic value they create for you, or a portion of that just makes sense for me. And again, these aren't new models. The model is what the record of the music industry does. And it
Yeah.
says it's open season. You and I could start a radio station tonight and we could play anything we wanted on the radio station, but we cut a deal with the rights organization of the American music, you know, artists of America, and they track every song and they send us a bill at the end of the year. And I think something similar needs to happen here. We need to learn from the sins of the father, meaning original media, meaning digital media companies, specifically newspapers, that were so enamored with those cool cats from the valley that we let them crawl our data for free and chop it up and sent us pennies in exchange for they got dollars. And we all
Hmm.
thought, oh, but wouldn't it be great to have this traffic and we can advertise against this traffic? We got squat for those shitty digital ads and they built a multi-trillion-dollar business. So they need to learn from the sins of old media companies that were just fascinated by these new content technology companies.
Hmm. Okay, final AI point, tangentially related. So there were these two research papers that came out demonstrating what ChatGPT can do. The first paper was titled, "Can ChatGPT Decipher Fed Speak?" And the answer was a resounding yes. It successfully figured out if central bank statements were hawkish or dovish. The second paper was titled, "Can ChatGPT Forecast Stock Price Movements?" The answer again was yes. The AI evaluated news headlines about public companies and then accurately predicted whether it would move up or down. Uh, what do you make of that? Or I'll be more specific. Should Wall Street analysts be worried about their jobs?
I don't know. I think that so first off, the research community has been decimated already. The time to worry about their
Yeah.
jobs was 20 years ago when they separated banking from research. And that is, I forget his name. There was some amazing Solomon analyst who was the best telco analyst. And he used to go into every telco that Solomon Brothers was looking to do their IPO and say, I'll write research on you. Everyone will be aware of you. I'll wink, wink, put a high price target on you if you give us investment banking business. And these research analysts were making 10 and 20 million bucks a year. And then people realized that these guys just turned into whores and weren't giving honest advice. And
Mm.
so they made them separate the banking business from the research business. And because research could no longer win investment banking business for the investment bank, research analysts started making a lot less money. They were less profitable, and slowly but surely, the majority of them got laid off. So the research community has already been decimated. Now, you could argue it created a vacuum in a market for independent analysts like Lynn Alden, or some companies like Sanford Research that just do a great job, or is it Sanford Bernstein, doing good independent research. I think there'll always be a market for independent research, even if it's just covering who does the best job of AI, or who does the best job, what alternative investment funds do the best job of leveraging AI. But there's a reason why Ken Griffin is spending, I think, hundreds of millions of dollars on this. Ultimately, there will be generative AI that looks at what other people are doing and starches out the margin, similar to an arbitrager. But I think for the next 2, 3, 5, maybe even 10 years, there's going to be an arms race here. And similar to quant trading, where the initial quant guys found signals and were able to discern signal from noise and make, millions of bets every day on small price movements. And I think it's James Simmons, the guy from Columbia who made billions at Renaissance. He was a math professor at Columbia. Yeah. You're going to see a new breed of hedge fund managers who will make a shit ton of money, who kind of get an edge using generative AI. I think it's a really exciting field. Now, what gets even weirder is your ability to predict their tone and their language and interest rates. I think that is super interesting. But over time, it gets arbitraged out. I think it's healthy. I think it's going to be super exciting. If I were to tell anyone, I was on the phone with this kid from Stern. I spoke at the Stern event, and a kid called me and said he was looking for an edge. He's trying to get in the payments field. I'm like, well, look, it's a tough time to get a job in the growth economy right now, because the growth economy is now shrinking. Mm-hmm. They're firing people, not hiring them. But the one way to slipstream or short circuit all of this is to become the guy or the recent MBA graduate that really understands how to apply AI tools for customer acquisition or product development in that domain. Mm-hmm. If someone contacted us at Prof G and said, I know how to use generative AI or LLMs to produce your podcast in different languages, or figure out a way to increase the subscribers to your newsletter from 350,000 to 500,000 using AI tools, and this is how you do it, and these are the AI, and these are the models, I'd be like, okay, you're hired. What are you charging us? Right? And so that is a
Please
skill.
Don't do that if you're out there. Do not contact us.
If you have that skill, oh my gosh, or if you're looking for a skill and just start using these things, and you're fascinated by them and kind of figure out the back end and start figuring out how to piece them together to do kind of sequential requests. Yeah, I think it's a super exciting field. I'm not as worried about it. Everyone else, and you didn't ask me this, thinks it's kind of this doomsday machine. I find everyone who claims it's a doomsday machine and thinks we should pause just wants to catch up and is totally full of shit. See above Elon Musk. But I think it's super exciting. But yeah, it's going to create alpha, or whatever you want to call it. It's going to create some outsized returns for a hedge fund that figures this shit out.